Hello everyone, and welcome to the History of Everything pod. I am your host, Wes Dunbar, and today we're going to talk about the Ottonian dynasty. But first, we have some geography to get straight. By the end of our last full-length episode, Charlemagne's empire, which had stretched from the Atlantic Ocean as far west as modern-day France, all the way to the Oder River near modern-day Poland, had been split into three separate kingdoms by his grandsons. Now, I won't get too into the weeds with the fracturing and reshaping of the kingdoms, but for our purposes, by the year 870, there were three large kingdoms present in the lands Charlemagne had conquered. In the west sat West Francia, ruled by Charlemagne's grandson, Charles the Bald. In modern-day northern Italy sat the Kingdom of Italy, ruled by Louis II, holding the title Emperor of the Romans. He was Charlemagne's great-grandson. And finally, in the east, we have, you guessed it, East Francia. So after the year 900 or so, the area that was the three kingdoms turns a little messy. Our old friend and historian from last episode, James Harvey Robinson, tells us that after 887, Western Europe had become fragmented into loose kingdoms that never had the same prestige or clout as Charlemagne's empire. Historian Peter H. Wilson has no fewer than 5 different kingdoms present in the Western European lands by the late 9th century. So by the time Otto I had reunited the middle of Europe and had himself crowned Holy Roman Emperor in the year 962, Western Europe had been a mess of disorganized and confused localities, all electing powerful leaders to protect themselves. To help us look outside of continental Western Europe, for this episode, I used maps made by Thomas Lessman, who runs the worldhistorymaps.info website. It's an awesome site, and it was extremely helpful in the making of this episode. So, thank you very much to Mr. Thomas Lessman. And, as per usual, you can see all the maps that I've used in the Google Doc that I've set up for the show notes to this episode. Okay, so what did the rest of the world look like? Going west to east, what we now call Great Britain was fragmented, and a soon-to-be English folk hero named Alfred was busy fighting off the Vikings who had begun occupying England in the north and the east. On the Iberian Peninsula, expansion by the Umayyad Emirate had reached as far north as the Pyrenees Mountains south of France. The Christian kingdom of Asturias occupied a small sliver of land, whose southernmost tip was near the city of Valladolid in modern-day Spain. In Africa, the biggest powers were the Bedouin tribes, as well as the Tulunid Emirate. Going back up to Eastern Europe, there was an assortment of Slavic peoples like the Croats, the Magyars, Polanes, Moravians, and more, who lived just outside the reach of the old Carolingian conquests. Further southeast, we run into the Bulgarians, another East European peoples who had settled down and fought with some of the groups I just mentioned, and also butted heads with the Byzantines, even killing the Byzantine Emperor Nicephorus in 811. Then, of course, we have the Byzantine Empire in modern-day Greece and Turkey. You'll remember the Byzantines from the bonus episode. They were the rival to the Holy Roman Empire for the claim to the legacy of Rome, and, if you missed it, you can see just how contentious this rivalry was by checking out the bonus episode. The last great power I'll mention is the Abbasid dynasty, that was located south of the Byzantine Empire and, by the year 900, had expanded into modern-day Iraq and Iran. So roughly speaking, those are the major players in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Now that we've gotten our geography down, we return to Western Europe and back to the Holy Roman Empire. The crown of the Holy Roman Emperor today sits in Vienna, Austria, and has since about 1800. The crown was moved there by the Habsburgs as a way to keep the imperial regalia from falling into the hands of that upstart French corporal turned emperor we discussed last time around. Don't worry, we'll get to him eventually. The crown is unusually shaped, being an octagon rather than a circle. It prominently features 144 precious stones, such as sapphires, emeralds, and more, and as such is impressively gaudy even by today's tastes. Aside from all this is the fact that you literally can't even wear it because it's so big. Literally, it's too big around to place on anyone's head. It's so big, in fact, that it was only used for the crowning ceremonies, and instead of being placed on the new emperor's head, it would be held above it by whoever was crowning him. Standing upright from the front plate, one of 8 that encircle the crown, is a big decorative jeweled cross. The imperial crown is, in many ways, a perfect metaphor for the Holy Roman Empire itself. It was large, clunky, and featured many disparate elements tossed together to form a larger, more impressive accomplishment. The first emperor to be crowned with this large, clunky crown would be Otto, first of his name, more typically known as Otto the Great. Otto was the son of Duke Henry of Saxony. Henry was technically elected to be the King of East Francia, but he saw his title as being more of a Grand Duke title, something between a duke and a king on the scale of feudal power. Austrian historian Friedrich Heer explains this system by saying, quote, "The Germans, then, are the 4 great tribes who in military emergency choose for themselves leaders, dukes. The dukes, in turn, elect a superduke as king and fight under his leadership." End quote. This system of semi-kingship was intended as a way to unite the duchies in case of invasions or other emergencies. In Henry's case, he was elected to defend East Francia from the invasions of the nomadic Magyars from modern-day Hungary. These Magyars, pushing westward, had seized large tracts of land for themselves, and had a considerable military force by the time of Henry's election, and so, to get them off his back, Henry would pay tribute to the Magyars in exchange for a 10-year peace. Paying tribute was obviously embarrassing for the Frankish king, but it did allow him to build up his armies in preparation for an invasion into the Magyar lands. The 10-year truce between Henry and the Magyars only lasted about 8, and in 932, Henry alerted his vassals to prepare for war. Gathering all the men and weapons he could, Henry marched on the Magyars, defeating them at the Battle of Riad. The Magyars would not invade East Francia again in Henry's lifetime. However, after Henry died, the Magyars decided to test the mettle of the new king and Henry's son Otto, and in the year 954 invaded the Duchy of Bavaria. This invasion was a crucial early test for Otto. The Magyars had been pushing up against the eastern border of the Frankish lands since the days of the Carolingians, and had constantly been an external threat to the peoples of Western Europe. If Otto could pull out a convincing victory over the Magyars, it would go a long way in legitimizing his kingship and earn him prestige that no Frankish leader had earned since Charlemagne. Thus, in 955, Otto, like his father Henry before him, would round up his armies and march east to fight the nomadic invaders. Otto's armies would soon meet their enemy on August 10th, 955, at Lechfeld, and after an initial skirmish, Otto ordered his armies to charge into the Magyar lines. The Magyars specialized in horseback archery, and so this meant that if Otto could get close enough to the enemy lines and engage them in hand-to-hand combat, his chances of winning would be a lot better. Seeing this opportunity, Otto is supposed to have turned to his men and said, quote, "It is up to us good men in this emergency, as you yourselves see, my soldiers, not to tolerate the enemy at a distance, but only face to face. For up to now I have made glorious use of your energetic hands and unconquerable weapons everywhere outside my own soil and imperium. Shall I now turn my back on my land and realm? We are surpassed by numbers, but not courage or arms. If the end lies near, my soldiers, it is better that we die glorious in battle than be beaten by the enemy and enslaved or strung up like animals. I would say more, my soldiers, if I could augment your courage or boldness by words. Now let's open this conference with swords rather than tongues." End quote. Despite being outnumbered, Otto managed to drive his armies into the Magyar front, and after fierce fighting, the invaders were repelled and fled. Otto's victory at the Battle of Lechfeld, though underrepresented in modern popular history, was a crucial turning point in the formation of Europe. Had the Magyars not been defeated that day by Otto, it is likely that they would have continued their trek westward, and the history of Western Europe, and subsequently the world, might have turned out in a very different way. However, the most immediate consequence for our story is that Otto's legitimacy as King of East Francia had been solidified by a spectacular win over the pagan Magyars, giving the impression that God favored Otto. Here writes, quote, "Otto knew that his saving potency as king was at stake in the battle. Its outcome would prove whether he was indeed the mighty one, strong to save, who could secure peace for his people, fruitful harvest for the land, and fame and immortality for the warriors." End quote. Having soundly defeated perhaps the biggest existential threat to his realm, Otto was now ready to take his newly won clout and take up the mantle that Charlemagne had left. It should be noted that by this point, Otto had managed to secure for himself a kingdom that stretched from northern Germany down to Sicily. He had managed to secure the kingdom of Italy for himself back in 951. In a turn of events worthy of a movie all its own, Otto had received a letter from a woman named Adelaide of Italy, the widow of the previous Italian king, asking for support and protection. Adelaide had been taken hostage by the current claimant to the Italian throne named Berengar II. Now Berengar wanted to forcibly marry Adelaide to his son, ensuring the ascendancy of his kingship, but Adelaide refused. Otto received Adelaide's letter with almost certainly a mixture of surprise and satisfaction. If he married Adelaide, any son born into the pairing would have claims to both East Francia and Italy. However, Otto wouldn't have to wait for future generations to inherit the two kingdoms, as he was soon drawn into war with Berengar anyway. After realizing that he had no support among the Italian nobles, Berengar fled his capital, and the inhabitants of Pavia threw open their gates for Otto, crowning him King of Italy with the Iron Crown of the Lombards. Following his acquisition of the Italian crown in the year 951, and his victory over the Magyars 4 years later, Otto appeared to be in a better position than anyone to reclaim the title Holy Roman Emperor. However, after his defeat of Berengar, Otto began to feel that his position in Italy was weak, and so he allowed Berengar to return to the Italian throne so long as he would swear loyalty and fealty to Otto. This course of action was deeply unpopular with members of the royal family and some of the dukes back in Germany. That dissatisfaction would lead to a rebellion from Otto's son and heir, Ludolf, that took Otto nearly 3 years to put down, after which Otto pardoned his son for the rebellion. Ludolf and the former rebels would be vindicated, however, because Berengar soon rebelled against Otto. Fed up, Otto resolved to cross the Alps and put an end to his Italian problem once and for all. And it's at this